much training did you get when you were called to be the bishop to handle child abuse?
So great question, right? I think that unless you've been a bishop, unless you've been in that situation, you wouldn't have the first clue how much training we get. And maybe we'd assume that there's a lot. And the reality is there's not much at all. I don't feel like I got any training about how to handle abuse or how to handle even difficult situations. I have a handbook, of course, and that's a valuable resource, but I don't feel like I got very much training at all.
Okay, so there was like no specific how to respond to abuse or anything like that while you were in your service as a bishop?
Not that I was aware of. Now, I've become aware recently of some training that apparently was available, like as in videos or something that you could watch, but I don't recall any of that at that time.
Okay. And then what about domestic violence or any form of abuse? Not specific to child abuse, but what about domestic violence or familial conflict or anything? Did you receive any kind of training for that?
No, and even, I'm expected to be able to help counsel people, and not just through spiritual struggles, but through normal, like, familial troubles. And I didn't get any training on that, at least not from the church. I got a little bit from my wife, which was very helpful. As I and I studied some, I read a couple of books that were helpful in that process, but sometimes even then just a little bit of knowledge actually makes you even worse because you think you understand a situation, right, but in reality you don't understand a situation. You start to throw out some of the pearls that maybe have helped you in your life and don't realize how those can affect somebody poorly. And so, yeah, I was maybe left, I didn't feel that way at the time, but looking back, maybe left in even a little bit of a worse position because I knew a little bit.
Yeah.
I knew a little bit, and I thought I knew a lot more than I probably did.
Well, and I love that you admit that, because one of the things that I do quite a bit of in my clinic when working with LDS clients is I undo really bad counsel from bishops.
What?
It's really hard, and most specifically within a marital construct. And usually when those bishops are willing to chat with me, and I've got the release of information signed and everything, and I can chat with a bishop, usually they'll tell me that they felt inspired to share that wisdom, which has absolutely led to my belief that power of discernment is not as reliable as the church would like for us to think that it is. But more often than not, what it was is a bishop repeating something that he had heard during his own marital therapy or his kids' marital therapy, or that he read from some book somewhere. And I would have to spend a lot of time with that bishop and say, well, not a lot of time, but I would spend time with that bishop and say, that advice was very individualized for your circumstances, and you can't throw a blanket out like that. I remember one of the couples early in my career, so this was almost a decade ago, one of the couples had come into me and they were having some difficulties with sexual intimacy, and she had been a victim of sexual assault, and the bishop's advice to her was hold hands and show non-sexual intimate touch with your husband until it feels comfortable for you. And I remember saying, no, let's stop that right now. Don't touch your spouse, because even holding hands made her physically uncomfortable. She was having severe PTSD, and by having what the bishop was essentially doing is what we call exposure therapy,
right?
Which exposure therapy can be very effective, but we don't utilize it in unresolved post-traumatic stress disorder. So every time she would force herself to hold her hand or hold her husband's hand, she was being re-traumatized, and by the
Right.
time they got to me, they didn't have any major issues in the relationship, but they were on the verge of divorce because of this advice that had been given from the
Right.
bishop. And so I had to, when I talked to the bishop, and he felt terrible, and I was my
Sure,
experience.
he's not being malicious. He just
Right.
doesn't understand.
Right. And my experience with most bishops, when I've had the opportunity to work with them and provide maybe a little bit of training on what not to say, because that's really what my training has been with the bishops when I've gone to them and I've trained them on some things that they really need to avoid saying and doing. They are open to learning. They want that advice.
Right.
They want help, like the need for, we don't know how to handle this is huge. And yeah, I'm going to go out and say, based on your own personal experience, Mason, and then based on my experience working as a counselor and then having those LDS referrals come to me and speaking with bishops directly, there is a need for advice.